scientific assessment, foresight, and advanced studies. His talk is going to be about transition to agroecology, insights from a foresight study on European pesticide-free agriculture in 2050. And Olivier Mora had initial training in agronomy and sociology. He's a foresight specialist, a research engineer at INIAV, located in Paris. He has coordinated foresight studies at regional, national, and global level about rural areas, agricultural biomass, regional forest and climate change, global land use and food security, and pesticide-free agriculture in Europe. He's currently involved in various European Horizon projects, including Organic Target for EU on the transition for organic farming, Fortuna on building a research agenda for reducing pesticide use, and Eye of Europe on strengthening the foresight community in Europe. He is the French representative in the SCAR Foresight Group. Olivier, it's a pleasure to have and an honor to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, José. Thank you for inviting me to do this talk. So first, I will share my screen. My talk will be about using the European pesticide-free agriculture foresight that I've conducted recently to develop some element of thought about what could be a transition to agroecology in Europe. So I will begin just now by sorry. Okay. I will begin by putting the scene and saying what is the problem, what are the issues with chemical pesticide, and why there is a need to develop agroecology. So chemical pesticides are key element of crop protection. It's well known. They improve and increase the yield. They improve the quality of agricultural product. And now we have the conventional cropping systems are strongly depend on the chemical pesticide. But now we know that this trajectory is unsustainable. First, we can observe that there is an increase of genetic resistance in pest species that are targeted by pesticide. This led to what we call an arms race, increasing the number of pesticides that we use for doing pest control. Second, it is well known, chemical pesticides have a negative impact on environment, water, soil, air, biodiversity, of course, and human health. So I will not detail this question, it is well known. But there have been a number of policy at the European level for the last 20 years. For example, concerning water quality or sustainable use of pesticide. But what we see in the number is that they have limited impact on the pesticide reduction, we have still the same use of pesticide in Europe. And at the same time, because of the research and the impact that are identified of pesticide, we have less and less molecules. So we are like in a situation that could look like a dead end for some cropping system. And we have a lot of problem for sustainability of cropping system. So this foresight is based on the idea that we have a limited impact of this past policy in terms of pesticide use. Until now, those policy have tried to implement a change in the approach of innovation in cropping system based on an incremental approach, aiming at reducing pesticide use. And what we aim to is to do a paradigm shift toward a disruptive approach, aiming at building cropping system without chemical pesticide. So to do that, we have we want to explore the possibility of chemical pesticide. So this conducted in the framework of the French National Priority Research Program called Growing and Protecting Crop Differently, but is also linked at the European level to the European Research Alliance toward chemical pesticide-free agriculture. So the question that we have tried to deal with is to build scenario, to elaborate scenario of pesticide-free agriculture, but also to look at what kind of transition could be implemented to reach the scenario in 2050. So you can find all the report, the full report, and a summary of this study online on the website of INRAE. So now I will begin saying a word about the methods that we have been using during this foresight. It combines several methods: scenario planning, downscaling European scenario into national or regional scenario, and backcasting, which is a way of building a transition from now toward the objective, the target in 2050, and also modeling to assess the impact of the scenario. It was a 2-year project with a dedicated project team, and more than 100 of European experts have participated in the work. And there in blue, you see the different expert groups that have been mobilized to work in this study. We developed in this study a systemic approach, integrating multiple domains from public policy and diet to cropping system and value chain. We have 3 kinds of results. Those are 3 scenarios and their transition pathway, quantitative assessment of the impact of the scenario, and also 4 transition pathway based on 4 case studies in Finland, France, Italy, and Romania. So it was just to give you a quick view on this method. I will now go into the detail of the strategy for chemical pesticide-free crop protection in 2050 that we have built. We have first a look at what exists today. And we ask ourselves what kind of strategy for protecting crops without chemical pesticide we could develop. And there, agroecology appears as an important answer. In the diagram, you can see the pest at the center, and around them, the 6 categories of modes of action: biocontrol, plant breeding, management of landscape, special management of crop diversity within fields, temporal management through cropping practices, which is crop sequences, for example, or crop rotation, physical control, and also epidemiological surveillance that is used in order to implement an action through chemical control or through biocontrol. So we ask ourselves, based on this figure, what happens when we try to eliminate the chemical pesticide, and what are the consequences on the crop protection that we have. So first, what we see is that there is no possible one-to-one substitution between a chemical pesticide and a mode of action. So we must always work with combining modes of action. But what we see is that these modes of action are completely intertwined in cropping system. In reality, this means that we need to redesign the cropping system if we want to move to a pesticide-free agricultural system. And in fact, when we shift from crop protection based on chemical control to pesticide-free crop protection, we need to make a change from a curative strategy against pests to a preventive strategy. We need to anticipate more pests because we have no strong tool to deal with pests as it was before. So we need to develop tools for monitoring pests at and the environment, and also to to have a capacity to anticipate the pest. And we also see that all the modes of action that are mobilized are more or less linked with biological regulation in soil and landscape. So we need there to mobilize this biological regulation through agroecological principles. And these agroecological principles include principles of organic agriculture that are also tools for developing pesticide-free crop protection, of course. So agroecological principles are really key element to move toward pesticide-free cropping system. And now, based on this first figure, we thought to imagine disruptive strategy for protecting crops without chemical pesticide in 2050. And for that, instead of focusing only on pests, we focused on the interaction between plants and pests, and also replaced this relationship between plants and pests into the two compartments we had already identified, landscape and soil. So we have the interaction with other species and food webs at the landscape level, but also in the soil through soil microbiota and higher food webs. So based on that, we have identified three disruption principles. The first is based on the relation between plants and pests. It's called strengthening the immunity of cultivated plants. The idea is to stimulate plant defense through plant defense stimulator, so to stimulate plant immunity. We can use also for that biocontrol, biostimulant, plant breeding, also building resistant or tolerant variety. We can also reinforce the interaction with the microbiota and other crops and plant services. We have a second hypothesis, which is managing the crop holobiont and strengthening host microbiota interaction. So it is there the idea of developing microbial diversity in order to strengthen the capacity of the plant holobiont, which is the plant holobiont is the entity made by plant, the initial cultivated plant, and the microbial communities that are associated with the plant in the roots, on the leaves, etc. So the idea is to strengthen the adaptability of the plant holobiont and also the function of the microbiota by modulating the existing microbiome through agricultural practices, crop choices, also manure, inoculation of microorganisms when there is a kind of dysbiosis in the soil, and plant breeding plants that are able to build this interaction with microbial community. And the last disruptive hypothesis we've built is designing complex and diversified landscape adapted to local contexts and their evolution. And here the idea is to promote biological regulation through the increase of biodiversity and agrobiodiversity over space and time, and building a complex landscape with semi-natural habitat, changing the mosaic of diversified crops to deal with the different pests we have in the landscape, and also using crop diversification and plant breeding, for example, to build to develop a crop mixture. So there are the three disruptive hypotheses that we have built at the level of crop protection. And based on that, we have combined and these hypotheses to other elements and build scenario, more general scenario for agriculture that I will present now. So I will give you now some element of the three scenario of pesticide-free agriculture that we have done. So the first scenario, called global market, is based on, we see the plant immunity hypothesis. is based on major change on international food market with global chain certifying pesticide-free production standards. And this move toward this kind of market is consistent with the shift of cropping system based on the strengthening plant immunity, robotization, and use of external input like biocontrol of plant-based plant defense stimulator. So we have done an illustration of this scenario with stakeholders in Tuscany working on the durum wheat and pasta production in 2050. But I will not present it now, but later. So this first scenario deals more with the development of kind of precision agriculture. So it's more precision agriculture than strict agroecology. But the question of plant immunity, but also automation, can also be part of some version of agroecology. The next two scenarios are scenario of agroecology. The scenario 2 has an extended vision of agroecology, including all the food system. And the last one is more vision of agroecology, which is territorially based. So the second scenario, healthy microbiome, is based on managing the microbiome at all levels from plant and field to processing and retailing and consumption. So the idea is here to replace, for example, biocides that are used in the transformation of food by microbiomes and to suppress synthetic biocide in the food chain. So these changes are supported by a shift of consumers' dietary patterns toward healthy diet that are more diversified diet that includes legumes, fruits and vegetables and less animal food. And we illustrate this scenario by a participative work on vegetable production in southeast Romania. So here the scenario is really based on managing the crop holobiont, so more something that has to do with the soil health also. And the third and last scenario, which is embedded landscape, complex and diversified landscape and regional food chain for One Health European food system, is a scenario that is based on territorial and regional food value chain with designing complex and diversified landscape, strengthening biological regulation, also with the idea of the relocation of the food value chain, but with also exchange between the different regions. And two objectives of this transformation, also to improve the environment, but also to improve human health. And this is done through territorial coordination to reinforce the biological regulation with more semi-natural habitats in landscape and with some kind of monitoring and anticipation of pests in the territory. So we have done this with this scenario. We have illustrated this scenario in two regions, in cereal and oilseeds production in South Finland and in wine production in Bergerac-des-Races in France. So I will now give a focus on this work that we have done to illustrate the transition. And also in this different region, we have built a transition pathway with stakeholders. So I will just describe these two transition pathways in Finland and France. Perhaps I jump. So in Finland, in this figure, you have the transition pathway with the circles. So the outer circle describes the situation today, and the inner circle describes the situation in 2050, and the different circles represent the decades, different decades. The transition for cereal and oilseed in South Finland depend on change in diet, cropping system, public policy, and value chain. First, we see that in the transition, there is an increase in the consumption of organic product and diversified local product. It supports the transition of local agriculture toward organic diversification of cereal, oilseeds, and legumes production, and some element of networking for sharing best practices are put in place. Also, there is a kind of support through payment for ecosystem services for implementing the transition at farm level. Farmers use shared machinery, collective decision support system, and this led to what they call an agroecological symbiosis, which is a kind of agroecological systems that produce both foods and energy for biomass. So this is a typical Finland scenario with very few people in the land. So the question of energy is really important in the rural areas. When we look at transition pathway for Bergerac, Duras, and wine in France, in this case study, we mobilize the same scenario, so the scenario of embedded landscape, and we work with this scenario with the actor. So we see that the transition begins with the building of a common agroecological project and some kind of participatory governance around the social contract of the territory. So the governance organizes the landscape planning and also the funding of the transition based on payment of ecosystem services. And at the heart of the governance, there is a citizen convention that is monitoring the transition. So the transition is not only concerning a farmer, but all the actors of the territory. There are places to co-design new agricultural system and share the knowledge. And farmers have evolved to a system that was vineyards monoculture toward a diversified mosaic of crops that are included in vineyards. And so there is some kind of also of biodiversity certification for the territory in the scenario and in the transition that opens new market for wine and diversified local product. So there are the two kind of transition pathway that we have built based on this third scenario, embedded landscape. And this gives you an idea of the kind of transition we can imagine with actor with this kind of scenario. Now I will I will sum up what are the characteristics of the cropping system in the three scenario and compare them. So to highlight the differences between the cropping system in the scenario, so you have S1, S2, S3, there are the three scenarios. So S1, global market based on robotization, S2 based on soil microbiome and plant holobiont, and S3 based on embedded landscape. So here you have three indicators, how they use exogenous input, how they use ecosystem services, and what kind of diversification was put in place. So what we see is that we have in the scenario S2 and S3, we use less input and we have more diversification and more ecosystem services. And ecosystem services, in a certain way, substitute to exogenous input in the different systems that are presented. The third scenario mobilized a lot of ecosystem services, but particularly biological regulation at the landscape level, few exogenous input, and a high degree of temporal and spatial crop diversification through building a crop mosaic at the landscape level. And what we have also for all the cropping system is the need to reduce mineral fertilizer and irrigation in order to reduce the pressure of pests on the cropping system. So one of the debate concerning the transition toward pesticide-free that is well known is about the impact on European food sovereignty. So we have conducted a simulation approach to know what are the impact of the three scenario on the and on the food sovereignty, for example. And the three scenario, the result of the modelization show a reduction in domestic use because of the reduction of in the consumption of calorie and also animal product in order to be consistent with the target of healthy diet in the scenario 3 and 2. And when we compare to the European production and net import, we see that the two scenarios have a positive impact also. It's the last the figure which is on the right, we see a positive impact on trade balance, with Europe becoming a net exporter in calorie in scenario 2 and 3. And well, it's not presented there, but we have the same impact on greenhouse gas emission. And we see that all scenario, and mostly scenario 2 and 3, lead to a reduction of greenhouse gas emission. So now, when we look at the transition in more general way, we have tried to summarize the condition for a robust transition and some elements that should be implemented to go into this transition. So we need a strong and coordinated measures that are required. The role of consumers and citizens in habitat are key in this change. Changing dietary patterns are really important in the transition. There is a need also to build a consistent mix of public policy, including regulatory policy for reducing pesticides, a transition policy for supporting farmers for changing their cropping system, environmental policy, food and nutrition policy to support also transition toward healthy diet in scenario 2 and 3. And there is also a need to develop and to develop a new market for product in agriculture. So new trade agreement for non-European partner in order to develop a pesticide-free European market. And also we need new production standards enabling the certification of product coming from an agriculture without chemical pesticide, and their valorization through food labels, including the organic food label. There is also need to help farmers to strengthen and to build the change at the farm level through mechanisms for sharing the risk among the different actors involved in the value chain through market contract or inside the territories. Also through building places for knowledge creation and co-conception of these pesticide-free cropping systems. Now I will just give a focus on the public policies that are needed for agroecological transition in scenario 2 and 3. For scenario 2, there is a need to develop a holistic policy on food system that will integrate agricultural policy and that will be oriented toward nutrition and health. And for scenario 3, there is to need to develop a cross-sectoral policy at territorial level for strengthening health and environment in a One Health approach, but also to have a kind of pavement for ecosystem services to ensure the transition of farms and territories. And here we saw also the need to have a regulation of the trade at the international level. So to end, and this will be my last slide, and we can have some discussion then. What are the main issues for transition to agroecology in 2050? So we see that in our scenario, we have really 2 scenarios out of 3 that are really based on agroecology, and this scenario have also co-benefits, and it is important as an argument for society. They both improve nutrition and health, environment, biodiversity and water, which is now a great problem, water in all Europe. Also greenhouse gas emission, and they can also reinforce European food sovereignty. we see that we can have a plurality of pesticide-free cropping system in 2050, and there are new avenues for research concerning soil microbiota, but also the monitoring of these cropping systems that could be developed. And also we have also this experiment that exists today through living labs to have this co-conception of cropping systems. We need to take into account the biological regulation at the soil, crop, landscape level, and also to focus now on preventive action. So monitoring there is really important. What are the conditions for robust transition, for change? We need to engage all the actors of the food system, so beyond the farmer, including all the actors of the value chain, storage, that are doing storage, processing, and retailing. So we need to have a larger view of agroecological value chain. We need also to have an input from consumer, and that need to shift their diets toward more plant-based diets. We need also some kind of mix of coherent, consistent public policy, cross-sectoral, holistic, integrated, beyond agricultural policies that are only today the way of supporting the transition. And we need also to have mechanism for sharing the risk taken by farmers during the transition. We need to have, for example, some element to help farmers to experiment a new way of building cropping systems. So backcasting in this work, backcasting, so the way of building this kind of pathway is a way of engaging the stakeholder in building a vision of a territorial transition. It's also a way of prioritizing the action. But transition is really a long process from now to 2050. And what is sure is that there is a need to build a conducive environment. It is to say a long-term stability for farmers to make possible their involvement in such transition. So thank you very much. You can find all the details of the work online, and I am open to your question.
Thank you very much, Olivier. That was a very insightful talk. So I'm sure that people listening to and it's going to be very helpful. I've got one first question here from Adelia Varela. She says that this transition pathway extends to 2050. Based on your experience, what are the main bottlenecks that could slow down or even prevent this transition in real farming systems?
We have a lot of bottleneck now because of the farmer crisis. And the backlash in the environmental policy. So there is a large debate at the European level. One of the classic way of pushing this transition was to have some European policy. European policy, not only based on agricultural policy, but larger holistic policy. And I think that if we look at the European level, it's in policy, it's a main bottleneck to build this holistic or cross-sectoral policy to have this kind of transition. At the territorial level, sure, farmer needs support to implement their transition, but often there is a lack of discussion between the different actors. So installing places of dialogues, of exchange between farmer and the rest of population and the public authority is a way of building this kind of vision and transition. So it can be a way to to open a discussion and to go toward a transition. So and also one of the bottlenecks when we look at the need to experiment of farmer to build this cropping system without chemical pesticide is for them to have a sure space to experiment. So have a risk sharing system during a period that could help us to maintain that their revenue and to experiment a new way of doing so. That are the main bottleneck that I see for now.
Thank you. We have a comment here from a colleague of ours in Uganda, and is asking for some advice that what are some best practice and collaborative approaches that could be adopted to ensure that we can effectively support farmers in transitioning to safer, more sustainable agricultural practices. So we said your thoughts and recommendations would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can show the way, pave the way for a collaboration.
Yeah, it's very large question. I think the way of doing of building co-conception inside living labs, having together farmers, researchers, actors of processing that discuss together can help to build some kind of transition. So I think also one main message of this work is to say that this transition is not only a transition of farmer, of cropping system, but needs to be embedded inside the changes of all the food chain. And I think it's right. That's why perhaps we need to build these places to co-conceive the cropping systems more sustainable of tomorrow. So that will be my. I don't know if I answer. I'm sure I'm not answering completely the question, but it's a. And also, also perhaps in terms of method, the backcasting work can be useful to do that because it helps actor to build a kind of hierarchy between what should be done today, what should be done in 5 years, what should be done in 10 years, what should be done in 20 years. So there are backcasting methods to do that that can be useful also for helping people to build a strategy for transformation for cropping system and for food system.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's another comment here. Incredible how much holistic knowledge you have combined. As I look as a farmer to this information, then it seems to me quite complex to understand and bring this in practice. Is the farmer aware or prepared to execute it in practice? Can you extract 2 or maximum 5 parameters that, and I don't read the rest of the question. I think it is missing.
Okay, no, but I get the idea of the question. Thank you also for this question. As I have also sharing the screen, I will share this slide to explain my point. What the question is, what we have today, what we know today, what we have today as technologies that can be implemented, and what is in this scenario more speculative, saying that in the scenario there is a need for creating more knowledge and more technology than we have today. If we look at the last scenario for designing complex and diversified landscape, we have already a lot of experiment, a lot of things going on around crop diversification, and this could be extended this could be extended and more developed because it is really well known now. all the issue of crop diversification of crop, associating crops in order to reduce the pest pressure. There are some experiment in landscape design. It's more complex because here we have to work with coordination at larger scale. There it's more experimental for the moment, but we can think that in 2050 we should have much more element because there are a lot of work in research done today. What we would need for developing this scenario, because we have all the knowledge of agroecology to develop this scenario objectively, is to have more tools to monitorate the impact of the development of pests on the crop production. So to anticipate better what could be the impact of pests, not in a short time or medium time, but from 1 year to the other, etc., or at a larger scale of a large region. Well, so for this scenario, we have a lot of on landscape diversification. We have a lot of element now today, but we lack element on crop monitoring. For the other scenario, for example, on the host microbiota interactions, there are a lot of research on seeds, for example, that are done today on mycorrhization, but we need still to know better what are the functions that are accomplished by a microbiome, a community of microbial community in the soil. So there is a need to develop more knowledge and in this way. And for the immunity of cultivated plants, and we have already this product on the market, but plant defense stimulator are already in the market, but we are not always sure of their impact, so we need more experiment on this product. We have also experiment with flash UVC for stimulating the plant immunity. So we have a number of elements that are already existing, and we know the mechanism at the molecular level. But we still need some knowledge on map resistance, for example, genes, on the various levels to stimulate plant immunity through building connection with the soil microbiomes. So I will not detail more, but you can have more details in the report, and it's more precise in the report.
Thank you. There's another question here saying that in all of this interesting work, is there a tool for planning and measurements to enable the transition that looks at the whole farm in an holistic way? If not, do you see an interest in the agricultural space to have such a tool with artificial intelligence that could speed the transformation?
Sorry, the tool would be about what?
If there could be a tool with artificial intelligence that could speed the transformation. If you see that the artificial intelligence can be of some help in the planning and measurements to enable the transition for the farm as a whole.
I think the question of artificial intelligence is really central to the first scenario, which is based on robots, on sensor, on measuring on real time the plant health. So it's a very technological way of seeing the question. And here we need first to collect the data. So there is perhaps some automatic process of collecting data, but also to understand well with this data on plant health, on the environment, on the condition in which some pests could develop or not. So to have some way of building simulations of this impact. And sure, artificial intelligence could be really important in building those models and dealing with this data, and also working with connecting this technology with robots. One of the issues with this scenario, which has already several elements in the research that are present is that, well, the question of consuming energy or specific mineral resources that could be really strong in the scenario because of putting sensor and treating the data. And also the capacity of farmer to invest in such transition. So I think perhaps some kind of some type of farming or farmers that have access to finance, to financial support could go in this direction, but for other it will be really complicated.
Thank you. Now, there's a question here concerning this work on the foresight. How can the outcomes of this participatory process be institutionalized so that they continue to influence policy decisions beyond the project timeframe?
Yeah, it's really good question. I think the life of the foresight study are longer than when you go out when the foresight study. They are diffused in number of arenas, discussed in a number of arenas. And what we see with our experience is that we can have a 10 years lifelong duration of the influence of the foresight in the discussion, and also the interest of the foresight for the discussion. If you want to implement, you can implement some strategic agenda based on the scenario, and you could, based on the scenario, you could have a strategy, and you could then try to fix also some indicator corresponding to the different scenario, and trying to see with one time are changing if we are going in a direction of one scenario or the other, and then based on that, trying to make an evolution of your strategy. So there are some ways of using scenario for strategy, but the link to public policy is much more complex. Because, well, as you know, public policies, there are a number of elements, structural and conjecture that and some elements are only linked to the present, and some elements are linked to the long-term view, and sometimes the long-term view is not so important in the way the decisions are taken in public policy. I'm not satisfied with that, but it's a matter of fact.
Yeah. So Nigel Thorgrimson is having another question. So he has a long introduction that I'm not going to read, but say, can you explain what is foreseen to combat weed competition in a pesticide-free agriculture?
Yeah. So the question of weeds, are we treated in the scenario? Well, there are perhaps there are two answers. The first is there is a classical way of dealing with weeds in organic agriculture, with having tillage, but very shallow tillage, concerning only the small part of the soil. The second way of seeing it is to have a permanent cover in the field, where you implement some crops in the field, keeping the cover, the living cover in place. So there are several ways. There are also ways of using living mulches, or there are some ways of treating weeds. The main question is the link to soil, and if you how you you don't put in danger the soil health, for example, through tilling. But there are a lot of experimentation on this question today. Yeah.
Just a wider question. Bianca de la Cruz is asking she's wondering if you've encountered any efforts for collaboration toward wider agroecology development between the European Union and agrarian countries in global south, particularly South and Southeast Asian states. Do you know of any collaboration going on?
I know Alison Loconto from INRAE is working on some collaboration, I think, but it is mainly with Africa. Perhaps there are some projects with India, but I'm not aware of all the projects that are going on in the global south. So I think perhaps to go back to Alison Loconto, for example, would be a good way.
And there's another one. Thank you for the insightful presentation. How can we collaborate to apply your experience in Africa, particularly in Ethiopia, where there is a high dependence on agrochemicals? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's really a strong question, because what the cropping systems that we are showing are very much based on the situation in Europe of cropping system or farming system. So and also the climate condition are also quite different. But perhaps what you see around the scenario 3 embedded landscape, there are some elements that are very classical in agroecology that could be mobilized in a transition. But you have to look at it closely.
Okay. So to finish, can I be cheeky and ask you if you are inclined, or what is your guess to the future towards the 3 scenarios? Is there a one that you rather inclined to believe that it's going to be the future?
Yes. I don't know. I don't have really as a foresight. I don't prefer one to the other. I think each scenario is part of a debate. I think the first scenario is already in a place. The third scenario, in some way, also, because there are some work that have been showing this kind of scenario before this foresight. So what is a bit new here is a way of looking at soil health, microbiome, as this interaction with microbiome. So I think also there is a lot of things to do with microbial ecology. Putting microbial ecology into agroecology would be really interesting to develop.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Olivier. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much
Thank you very
for
much.
getting some of your time with us. And we will now move to the second speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Denis Naughten, and he's going to talk about narrowing the gap between research and policies. Denis is a global science policy leader and former Irish minister with 27 years in Parliament, including senior roles bridging science, technology, and governance, led groundbreaking international initiatives at the Interparliamentary Union, including the Ethical Charter on Science and Technology, and championed climate action, sustainable development, and evidence-informed policymaking. Proven ability to translate complex science into actionable legislative outcomes through diplomacy, stakeholder engagement, and institutional reform. So I believe it's a privilege to have you with us. Thank you very much for using some of your time, and you were so fast accepting this invitation. I'm very, very proud to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, José, and I'm delighted to be able to present to you today. I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you can see that now, can you? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I'll just start the slideshow here in relation to that. So first of all, listen, thanks a million for giving me the opportunity to present today. My slideshow is jumping ahead of me there. And just maybe to give a background to the people that are on the call here today. First of all, I'm from a farming background. I was reared on a rural farm in the middle of Ireland, a sheep and mixed dry stock farm. And I have been a member of Parliament up until last November for 27 years, including a term as Minister for Communications, Climate Action, Environment, Energy and Natural Resources. I've also been a shadow minister for agriculture, served on the Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture and chaired a number of parliamentary committees. And over the last 4 years, I have been working with the Interparliamentary Union. And the Interparliamentary Union is like the United Nations, but it's where parliaments come together, 181 parliaments from around the world. And I've chaired a working group of members of parliament who are looking at how we can feed more research into the policy making and legislative processes. So that's my background to the presentation that I'm going to make here today. So I suppose, look, the first thing I'd say is that, look, I have a lot of people within the research community asking how do they feed their research into the policy process. And the strong message I'd like to come from the seminar this afternoon is the most effective way to do that is to build policy into the design process from the very start of the project, rather than looking at it as a potential add-on at the end of the process. And to give you a practical example in relation to that, I'm working with a project in sub-Saharan Africa that's looking at drought vulnerability in relation to crops. And they're running a crop trial on 3 different sites. And naturally enough, they have local partners in relation to that. They're engaging with local farmers. They also have the agriculture ministries involved in that project. But importantly here, they've also asked the local members of parliament that represent the sites where these crop trials are taking place to actually come and visit the sites, to meet with the local farmers, to meet with the local research partners, so that when at the end of this process there is a results in terms of the research, there's a policy recommendation in terms of the research, they're not only feeding that evidence in through the agriculture ministry, but they're also feeding that evidence in through the local members of parliament that have seen the project on the ground, have been able to engage with the farmers that are being impacted by that project, and they can advocate both within parliament and with the agricultural ministry with regard to that project. So as part of the design process, the potential policy output and the route of travel of that policy output has been thought about at the concept stage of this particular project. I personally, as Minister for the Environment and Climate in Ireland, had personal experience of something similar, where we had the Environmental Protection Agency in Ireland working with local farmers under what was called the Smart Farming Initiative, where they were carrying out sustainability measures to reduce their carbon footprints. And as Minister, I was brought to some of these farms to meet with the farmers who were explaining to me the practices they were carrying out. And I was being presented with the empirical evidence in terms of the reduction in carbon emissions. But the Environmental Protection Agency every 6 months was updating me on progress in relation to those particular projects. And I was getting a direct feedback in terms of the sites around Ireland that were being designated for this particular project and the output and conclusions that were coming from that. So there was a direct channel to me as Minister from those that were involved with the research. Now, I know that we have on the line today some representatives from Teagasc, the research organisation in Ireland, and some of them can talk to you about their signpost programme, which again is working with farmers in Ireland, looking to reduce their overall carbon emissions, feeding research that has been done and applying it on the ground, on farms, with farmers as partners in relation to those projects and measuring the reduction in carbon emissions. And in Ireland, the Irish Farmers Association, one of the farming organisations in Ireland, have used those particular farms to bring the local members of parliament to visit those farms, to look at the progress that's being made and to engage directly with the farmers, giving the members of parliament and ministers an opportunity to get a detailed insight into the measures that are being taken and the impact that they have in terms of carbon emissions on farms, but how they're actually achieving overall government policy as well. So it's by building these into the design helps to ensure that whatever policy outcomes come out of the projects are much easier to apply, much easier to progress, and open the key doors that are needed to make the policy changes that are required. So here is a link to a submission that I've made to the European Commission. And the European Commission at the moment is looking at how they can actually increase overall research investment across Europe, both within the Union as a whole, but also at member state level, to 3% of GDP. And the point that I've made in my submission to them is that you're never going to achieve that particular target unless the people that hold the purse strings, the ministers and the parliaments around Europe, see the impact and the benefit of that investment. And the difficulty is at the moment for the investment that's being put into research more generally around Europe, about 10% of that is being applied to a commercial output, and 90% of it doesn't see any commercial impact in relation to it. And the difficulty is at the moment in terms of research, that's the only measure that's there to show impact to those people that are investing the money in. And we all know that there are, in terms of research, many policy implications of research. But because we're not engaging with the people that hold the purse strings, the ministers and the members of parliament, explaining to them how this research impacts on various policy challenges that they have on a day-to-day basis, they don't see the value in relation to that. And as a result of that, they don't see the overall value in investing in research rather than investing in healthcare, rather than investing in other types of infrastructure. So it is important to open up that engagement and that particular relationship. So as a parliamentarian and as a minister, normally when the research community come to speak with me and my colleagues, you're not too often too long into the conversation until the begging bowl comes out, until the researchers ask for more money. So they're not coming saying, look, here is research that we've produced, here is the policy impact of that, here is the way that you can actually implement it. You usually get pretty shortly into the conversation, we're looking for more money, this is what we've done to date, and we need more money in order to progress it. So by taking that particular approach, you're actually undermining the work that you've done to date. You're undermining the opportunity to actually see additional investment because the focus is on getting more money rather than actually trying to fulfill the remit that your research has in actually having a policy output and insofar as is possible, outlining how that particular research output that you have can be implemented within the policy regime that there is in a particular country or across a particular region. So one of the first things that I want you to remember here is that policymaker is an all-encompassing word, and it makes up many different individuals. It's a bit like talking about researchers or scientists that come from the pure sciences, the social sciences, the humanities. They're all very, very different. And it's the same in relation to policymakers. You have those that draft policy who are usually public servants, mainly in government departments and sometimes in government agencies. And they put forward policy proposals to ministers and to Parliament. And it's ministers and parliaments that decide on a particular policy approach. They're the ones that make the decision on that. And then you may have another arm of government, a state agency or a body that actually implements the policy that has been decided upon. And those three policymakers have three very different needs, and you need to be conscious of those in terms of actually engaging with them. So the first thing that you need to do if you want to engage with the policy process is actually map out that whole engagement process. What are the pathways for evidence-based policy? Mapping out that reveals, how scientific advice travels into policy, how it arrives on the desk of decision makers. It's also important to identify the networks and knowledge exchange that is there already. In Ireland, if you're involved in agricultural research, then in all probability, you will feed that research into the policy making process through the advisory service and research service like Teagasc in Ireland. In other countries, they have other channels that are available to them. So you need to identify those particular channels. And the third thing is then that you need to strengthen communication and effectiveness. Targeting communication with the individuals that are seeking that evidence, that are in a position to change policy or recommend a change in policy, start building relationships with them so that the research that you're producing is more impactful in terms of a policy output. So what I've done here is giving you an example of a piece of work that I did for the Interparliamentary Union. And in this piece of work, which is a global piece of work, which covers about 1/3 of parliaments globally, we've mapped how research actually feeds into the parliamentary process, as I say, in about 1/3 of parliaments globally. And, any of you that are online today, you can go and look at that and see what is the channel for feeding your research and policy recommendations into the parliamentary process in your own country. Now, from the mapping that we've carried out, the most common mechanism for research to feed into the parliamentary process is where expert witnesses are invited before parliamentary committees that are considering specific legislation. But who's called in? Who are those expert witnesses? A lot of the time, it's the usual people that are providing evidence. So by actually reaching out through these particular channels, saying that you're willing to come in before a parliamentary committee, willing to offer your research and evidence, that gives you a better chance of actually presenting that evidence before a parliamentary committee and potentially getting traction to act on the policy recommendations in your research. So when you're doing this mapping process, you need to identify who are the policymakers, those who draft the policy recommendations or legislation, those that decide on it, and that would differ in terms of presidential democracies or parliamentary democracies as to who actually makes the decision in relation to that, and then who delivers on that policy on the ground. It may be and in this case, an agricultural agency or organization that's funded by the state that might actually deliver it on the ground. And all of those are involved in one form or another in developing and delivering on that policy. And you need, as I say, to engage with them differently. And you need to identify then, how does the evidence feed into them? So as I say, you have state advisory services, whether it's environmental or agricultural advisory services. You have non-governmental organizations, like farming organizations, that can feed into that process. You have politicians and political advisors that can feed into the process. And what you need to do is to identify what are their particular priorities, not what your priorities are. But what are their priorities, and how does your research and policy recommendations tie into their particular agenda and program of policy reform? And that's a critical intersection that you need to link up if you're going to have an impact in terms of your research output. So as part of the work that I did with the Interparliamentary Union, we actually surveyed members of parliament from around the world that were using research evidence in their day-to-day work. And we asked them what were the reasons that motivated them to use academic research in their parliamentary work. And the three things that came out of that were, one, that it was a credible source of research. And look, from the people that we're talking today, I would expect that that threshold is met in relation to it. The second thing is that how this resonates with their constituents or with the electorate was a key consideration for them. And the third one was the clarity of the evidence that was being presented to them, how easy it was to read, to understand, and to actually articulate that. And that's on the politician or parliamentary side. In terms of a civil servant or a public servant, it's the same three priorities, except instead of constituents or the electorate, they're looking at it in terms of what are the policy priorities within that agency, within that government department, within government or by that minister, and how does the research tie in to their particular policy priorities. But the issue regarding credibility and the issue regarding clarity are the same regardless of which group you're actually engaging with. So how do you get your message across? Well, you need to focus on the 3 C's. The first is the context test. Can you show how your research fits into the current policy goals, be it climate, competitiveness, cost of living, whatever the case may be? If you're not able to fit your research into those current policy goals, then you're probably speaking the wrong language and you need to reassess that again. The second thing is the citizenship test. How does this impact? Who does it impact on, and how quickly does it impact on them? If you can't trace the impact back to real people or real communities, then it isn't going to land with decision makers, because you need to remember that we're talking here about public policy. So it has to impact and resonate with the public. And the third thing then is the clarity test. Can you explain your research without a PowerPoint? Can you hold the attention and explain clearly to non-experts in the room what you're talking about, what's your research output, and how does that clearly impact on policy so that it can actually resonate with them? And those 3 tests are vitally important in terms of your research output in progressing that down the policy channel. And if you cannot address those 3 tests, then you will struggle, really struggle to make impact. So in terms of the work that you're doing, timing is critically important here. Timing, timing, and timing. Timing, because research doesn't happen overnight, as we know, but neither does policy development. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not a case that the academic research is produced, It's landed at the door of an official or a minister, and that miraculously overnight a new policy happens. Developing policy can, in many instances, be a marathon. It's not a sprint. Legislation and policy change takes time. So you need to be conscious of that. The second thing is that you need to be careful in terms of when you present that evidence, because timing is critically important in relation to it. There isn't much point presenting the best possible evidence, within 3 weeks of a law being enacted. It's too late at that stage. You're much better having 90% of the evidence developed at a much earlier stage and feed into the process and identify concerns or issues that need to be addressed at a much earlier point. Yes, you're going to have a health warning or a caveat in relation to it that this is ongoing research. We still haven't completed the work. But as I say, it's important that you align your research outputs with the timing in terms of the development of policy and legislation. Also, as well, there are parliamentary cycles, there are electoral cycles. Very little policy change is going to happen at the end of an electoral cycle, whereas once a new parliamentary term or electoral term has started for a government, they're more open to particular policy changes. And the third thing then in terms of timing is persistence. You need to commit to this process. It's not a case of presenting the evidence and if it gets rejected, forgetting about it. If you produce a draft paper for an academic journal, and if that is rejected by the academic journal, you don't just throw it in the bin and forget about the research and move on. You look at redrafting it. You look at getting feedback from the editors and then trying to submit that again. It's the same in terms of policy development. It's about getting positive the feedback from the decision makers or policy makers that you're engaging with, seeing how that reflects your particular proposals, how your proposals can be redrafted based on the evidence that you've produced that actually meets in with the other two T's that I've just identified here. So one of the easiest ways to actually engage with the policy process is through politicians, particularly parliamentarians. And the reason that I say that is that in pretty much most jurisdictions in different parts of the world, there are mechanisms where you can actually feed research into the parliamentary process. You also have it where you can feed it into the policy process of government agencies. The difficulty is that when you submit it to a government department or agency, you may not see the output from that. There may not be a specific reference to your submission at the end of that process. And it's very hard to know how your particular research, how your particular policy proposals have impacted on the final policy position that's taken. That isn't the case with Parliament, because if you make a submission to Parliament, then those submissions get published. They're in a public forum, so straight away you're getting a valuable citation as a result of that. Also, by presenting evidence directly to Parliament and parliamentarians, they can quiz the Minister of the day on that. So you're bypassing the civil service filters within a government department or agency, where the Minister might never see that evidence or that research because a civil servant has decided that it's not relevant to the policy process that's ongoing at the moment. And as a result of that, it gives you a direct line to the decision makers, the parliamentarians that allocate the funding, that approve the policy, if you're in a parliamentary democracy, or the minister that signs off on that, whether it's in a parliamentary democracy or a presidential democracy. And you also, because it's a public forum, you have to present your research in language that is understandable. And if that gets pick up as a result of that, there's an opportunity for collaboration with an NGO or maybe with another researcher that's working in that particular field, or with parliamentarians that run with that particular policy proposal that you have presented to them. So there's momentum there for policy change, and it is an avenue that isn't being used by the research community, but is a very fertile avenue to consider. But regardless of whether you're engaging with parliamentarians or those that are drafting policy in government departments or agencies, it's important that you keep your message simple and clear. And you need to focus on how this particular work and research that you have produced will benefit real people. Because as I say, we're talking about public policy here. So it has to have some form of a public impact, and you need to be conscious of that in terms of the way you would actually present your research. And the second thing is, what policy change is needed to make it happen? So you need to be able to identify where the policy change needs to take place, what that policy change needs to be in order for your research output to be acted upon. So if you're in the research community and you get the opportunity to talk to a civil servant or a parliamentarian, regardless of who that is, you present to them in as clear a method as you can your research output and its policy impact. You need to remember that they have to communicate that to a number of other people. So if we take a civil servant, the civil servant has to communicate that to their other colleagues within the department, and ultimately to the minister to make a decision on that. So if you present a complex message to them that isn't very clear in terms of your policy ask, it gets mixed up by the time it reaches the minister, and the likelihood is that it won't be acted upon. And that's why it's so important that you have a very clear, simple message in the first instance, so that whether you're talking to a civil servant, you're talking to a minister, or to a parliamentarian, someone that has a role within the whole policy development process, that you have a very clear, simple message to present to them. The other thing is that it's important that when you do engage with them, that you actually listen, that you listen to the feedback that they are giving you, that you listen to the obstacles that may need to be overcome to have this particular policy implemented, because that particular feedback is important in order for you to review the way that you're presenting your research output in the first place. Just like presenting an academic paper and getting the editorial feedback in relation to that, it's the exact same thing in terms of the feedback that you would get from a policymaker, any of those three forms of policymaker that I identified earlier on. So you need to take a clear note of the feedback that you're getting and actually consider that. Look at how you can revise the policy proposal that you're putting forward. How does that dovetail with your research? How does it dovetail with the policy agenda of the government department, the government agency, or the government program or legislative program that it has? And as I say, that feedback is vitally important in order to do that. And I think you also need to try and focus on engagement with the policy process not being a one-off interaction. It's about building relationships. So even though you may get the opportunity to speak with a policymaker, to present your proposals to them, and they give you feedback in relation to that, it's important that you reach out to them again with a refined version of that based on the feedback that you've got. And the most effective tool that I've found talking with the research community around the world, talking with policymakers around the world, is a cup of coffee. Actually sitting down and having a cup of coffee with those policymakers. you outlining your particular approach to the issue, they telling you the barriers and obstacles that they're coming up against in relation to the policy issue, where the challenges in implementing the proposals that you're presenting, and building a relationship based on that, where you can actually co-create a solution to the particular policy challenge that they are dealing with. And sometimes you may not have all the answers in relation to that, but you have access to a huge resource in terms of paywalls that are there for research in many instances, and getting access to that information and being able to feed that back to the policymaker in a user friendly format. While it may not be your research or your evidence that you're presenting to them, it's helping to build that relationship. It's helping to build trust that will ultimately have a long-term positive impact on your research output. So just then to summarize the points that I've just made, it's important that you map out the systems that are there at European Union level or at national level. They're not mysterious. There are clear channels to feed evidence into the policy process. They're networks, they are full of agendas, and you need to identify those and who the actors are in it. You need to be conscious of timing, because policy doesn't run on research timelines, and you need to tie in with the political and policy calendar in terms of the research input that you're putting in. You need to abandon the jargon and you need to offer clear solutions, not just findings. And if you can tell a story in relation to the research and the impact that this can have on individuals or individual communities, then that's a very powerful tool in actually getting your message across. And as I say, it's about building trust, about building relationships that will go forward over time. And those types of relationships are what will ensure that your research really has a long-term impact. So that's just a flavour of the type of channels that you can use in terms of having an impact in terms of research and research outputs. And that can be research in terms of the research community, which can be academic, in terms of NGOs or farming organizations. It could be a study or analysis or a survey that's done within organizations that's feeding into the process. But it's about linking those particular research questions with the policy agenda of the government department or agency. And if you can do that, you're 50% along that road of actually having a real impact in terms of your evidence. So José, I'm going to hand back to you now. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dennis. What a wonderful talk, very inspiring. And you even answered the request of some people that you would like to have the contacts of the speakers. So there you go in your last slide. There they have it. And thank you very much for using the example of for building relationships to have a cup of coffee, because that's our national tradition. So we would be in much trouble if it was a cup of tea. But we are coffee drinkers, so at this side of Europe, that will work perfectly. So we have a contact here from Aziz Omar. Maybe you can also read it in the chat box. And so in the context of EU funding for food system transformation projects and strategies, how can researchers and social scientists highlight the policy impact of justice-based and rights-based agroecology and food sovereignty approaches and propose commercial applications? In other words, how can the socio-economic value of such a process be realized at the policymaking level so that it can foster startup business ventures?
Yeah, so it's a nice, easy question to start off with. And it is a little bit more complex, I suppose, than some of the approaches that I've been identifying in my presentation. But what I would do here in terms of this, in terms of justice and rights-based approaches, the people that can really articulate that are the people that are directly impacted by it. And that's usually the farmers on the ground. And that's why in terms of the project that I'm involved with in sub-Saharan Africa, that we've actually reached out to the members of parliament in the communities that are involved in this project. So in terms of the question that Aziz has asked, I would look at the farmers that you're working with in terms of these projects, or the community groups that you're working with. And I would help them to reach out to the members of parliament in those particular areas. Ask the members of parliament to come and visit the projects, to meet with the people that are involved in those projects, to show them the impact of that at a very human level. And as well as that, then you can provide them with the empirical evidence that backs that up, the economic evidence that backs that up. But people on the ground, they are going to be very well able to articulate how this is impacting on them. And that's the type of message that you would get across to the parliamentarians. And you would hope then that working with maybe some of those parliamentarians, hopefully one or two of them would begin to advocate for you, that they might make contact with the Agriculture Committee in Parliament. You get the opportunity to present your evidence and maybe bring one or two of the representatives from the community with you to Parliament to present that evidence to Parliament. And hopefully then that they would make a recommendation directly to the Minister for Agriculture or the Department of Agriculture in relation to it. So that, I think, is a way that you could help to move that particular process along. I would also, in tandem with that, reach out to the food agency or department, the state body that's involved with it. I would also make the same offer to them. They may or may not take you up on it, but I think taking a dual approach in relation to that is an effective way to do it, and no one can say that they have been excluded or undermined as a result of that.
So I think you'll be happy to see that the comments are calling your presentation from great to very powerful or fantastic.
Well, look, I'm happy here if people want to either feed in the chat or come on and maybe talk about a particular project in terms of frustration that they might have. And maybe I could give them some idea of how they would actually go about getting the research output into the policy system.
Thank you for that. There's Evelyn Zuniga is asking, is there a recommended or logical sequence for presenting proposals? For example, what is the most appropriate entry level, and how can a proposal be escalated to higher levels? For example, from local to national authorities, to ensure it reaches the relevant policymakers.
Right. So the first thing you need to do is to see how the proposals you have feed into the policy agenda of the government. So if it's at national level, you're looking at the national government, or at local level in relation to local or regional government, what is their policy agenda? So, in terms of Aziz might have, there might be in his country a commitment to, justice-based or rights-based agroecology. And if that commitment is there, then Evelyn would build her proposal around that commitment, name-checking that particular commitment, reaching out to initially the government department or agency that has responsibility for implementing that commitment, or the local authority or regional authority that has responsibility for it. But in tandem then with that, I would also reach out to the local government representatives, community representatives or parliamentarians as well, because they may be able to draw attention for it. I'd also look and see, are there particular non-governmental organizations that are in that space as well, that you could work with, that maybe already have a network of contacts that you can piggyback on to get your proposals presented, maybe with additional impact before these bodies or agencies. But the first step is to identify how your proposals tie in with the policy agenda that is there already. Because the difficulty is, if you're starting from a blank sheet, first of all, you have to convince the government, the regional government or the local government, that this is a policy issue that they need to look at. And they already have a whole list of things that they're dealing with. And now you're adding one more to that. So it's much easier to actually tie into the existing policy agenda and policy program that's there, and see how your proposals feed into that, complement or support, or question it, as the case may be.
We've got another question here, which is a rebound from the other side from Stefano Grando. It says, clearly the efforts to be clear, timely, and effective are basically on researchers' shoulders. But what about the politician side? Would it be possible to envisage some advice or awareness increasing initiatives for them to be more capable to ask the appropriate questions to science and understand properly the information they get?
Yeah, so Grando is right in relation to it. And first of all, yes, I am putting the responsibility on the scientific community. And the reason that I'm doing that is that, first of all, most of this research is publicly funded. So if it is publicly funded, then you have a responsibility to disseminate that. Now, I accept not all researchers are good communicators. But most researchers have access to some communication platforms that can help to disseminate that information for them. They have to communicate it with an academic journal to progress their own career. I would argue, if it's publicly funded research, they also have a responsibility to disseminate that to the public. And politicians and policymakers are also the public as well. But he is very correct in that it's a push-pull approach in relation to it. The research community can do only so much in relation to this. There is a responsibility on politicians, on public servants, to actually reach out for evidence as well. But it's much easier for them to reach out if that evidence is being presented in an understandable way. So I spoke earlier this week yesterday actually at a conference in Dublin, and I talk about the triple lock in terms of research. One, a lot of the time it's behind a paywall, so most people can't get it. Secondly, it's produced for academic consumption, which means that a person who is not an academic, or an academic outside that area of speciality, isn't going to understand it in many, many instances. And the third thing then is, you're asking me to try and decipher that research and then try and convert it into a policy proposal that ties into my policy agenda. So you have to help in terms of that triple lock in helping to unlock it. But there is a huge piece of work required on the politician side and on the public service side in getting them to reach out. So one of the things that I'm working on with the Irish government now is to try and make it a stipulation of every policy proposal that comes forward, that the civil servants would actually list the academic papers that they read in the process of drafting this paper. So I'm not asking them to do academic citation in terms of the policy proposal, because I don't think it would happen. And I think we're getting back into the whole churn in terms of academic citation and so forth, and some things getting referenced and some things not getting cited. But if, as an appendix to the back of the policy proposal, that those that were drafting the proposal said, these are the pieces of academic research that we considered in the process of developing this. That would give them an incentive to actually reach out to the academic community to look for evidence. And then the third aspect of it is in terms of the politicians and the parliamentary community. And this is the work that I've been doing over the last 4 years. What I've been saying to them is, look, in politics today, you have a left-winger approach and a right-wing approach. And sadly, that's moving further and further left and right in many parts of the world in terms of polarization. But we're all looking for solutions, practical solutions to housing, agriculture, climate change, whatever the policy challenge that we're dealing with. And science can provide us with an alternative. It's not left-wing, it's not right-wing. It's based on scientific method. There's methodology gone into how the proposals have been developed, the research that has been done, the weight in terms of the academic output because of it being peer reviewed. And that gives you a much stronger basis on which to build your policy proposals. So it is a push-pull in relation to it, and both sides need to come in the middle. And that's why the most effective tool is that particular cup of coffee.
Thank you very much. There's one more question here, and with this I will close this session. In contexts where government's challenges and corruption can affect policy implementation, how can researchers ensure that early or ongoing findings foster genuine collaboration among stakeholders and translate into sustained, impactful policy without frustrations?
This is a very good question, and it is absolutely a huge challenge for anyone that tries to cross the threshold from research into policy. You know, if you lie down with dogs, will you get up with fleas? And it is a real and genuine concern that's there. And that's why, in terms of the other replies that I've given, I've said to take a dual approach in relation to it, to contact the government department or agency, the organisation that is legally responsible for developing the policy or proposal, and in tandem with that, present it also to Parliament. Because that evidence, if it's presented to Parliament, and as I said, I've given you the QR code there of the channels into 1/3 of parliaments around the world, it ensures that your evidence is published as is, your research is published as you have presented it. And if someone tries to manipulate that or to use it for something that it's not supposed to be used for, or turning an argument on its head, you can always reference, well, here is the evidence that was presented. This is what Parliament got. This is what Parliament and the research community within Parliament actually published in the first instance, and you can always reference that. So I think taking that dual approach of Parliament, which is a public forum, as well as developing it through the policy back channels, provides you with a safety net in terms of that risk, in terms of being corrupted regarding the policy evidence that you present to them.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that was all. I will finish here the answering questions. Dennis, I cannot thank you enough for your time. It was very inspirational and very useful participation. So thank you very much. And I'm now going to make a small detour on our agenda, because as you know, this masterclass is organized by the Agroecology Partnership, and I myself work on work package 3 for communication, exploitation, dissemination. But also the work package 2 of the Agroecology Partnership is exactly on science to policy. And we have with us our colleague Hubert de Jong, and I ask him to take the stage. So we're going to use these few minutes for him to illustrate what the work package 2 for science to policy is producing. I don't know if he's already.
Yes, I am here, Jose.
Okay, so
Just
please,
making sound
Hubert,
check.
use this time and to make your presentation and introduce yourself and the wonderful work that you've been doing in Work Package 2.
Thank you so much, Jose and Sara, for organizing this this event. Hi, everybody. My name is Hubert de Jong. I will, like Jose said, quickly go through the Work Package 2 of Agroecology. My personal background is I'm a scientist in soil science with a PhD from Amsterdam University, but I've lived in Denmark for 20 years. Now, right now I'm at Aarhus University, DCA, the Danish Center for Agriculture and Food. I'm a colleague of Anja Hansen, who gave a presentation yesterday, as you hopefully have seen. And I will share my screen now. And just give me quick feedback if you are seeing the presentation now.
Yes, but yes, it's now
better. All right. Yeah. Like Jose is saying, the partnership is divided in work packages, and I work for the work package 2, Science to Policy interface, together with Alison Leconto from INRA and my colleague Ivana at Aarhus University. And well, this work package has really the Science to Policy as its main task. At a daily basis, I work at Aarhus University with the Science to Policy arena, where we work with government contracts, research contracts of Aarhus University and different ministries. So it's part of my daily job. But in the agroecology partnership, I work on an international level. And the level is in work package 2, we are right now actually having 30 partners in our work package from 16 countries. And among the partners, there are universities, there are research institutes from different private or public research institutes. We have education institutions. We have some governmental institutions, and we also have NGOs. You see the acronyms below here, a lot of institutes, but it's mostly to say that, yeah, we are from 16 countries, primarily from Europe, but recently we also in the partnership have established contacts with Africa and also Canada, so also New Zealand. So we also extending broadly outside Europe. Basically, very short. My presentation will be 5 minutes, I promise, Jose. So I'll keep it short. But what we really now do is within the partnership is trying to enhance and catalyze the science to processes of the agroecology transition in that context. And the masterclasses that we are attending right now is just one example of it. And as you also know, the partnership has actually a long-term horizon of the funding. We're looking 7-8 years ahead in the tasks and the objectives, that they are very broad, but also in a long-term perspective. So what we do is create and support the mechanisms for exchange between scientists and policymakers. We want to provide an evidence base for policies that actually support agroecology transitions. By that, we want to contribute to improve governance and policies. And doing that, we need to interact by interacting multiple actors, living labs, research institutes, practitioners, and also relate to them to try to understand their policy-related challenges. And also a task is actually capacity building, like this masterclass is, both for researchers and policymakers to raise awareness on these issues and strengthen the dialogue among them. So this is just a quick overview, my last slide for today, showing the tasks that we're doing. The first task is focusing on benchmarking the research and the sectoral policies in the agricultural agroecological context. In 2025, we have already started with a first survey on this. The second task is improving the capacity in governments of science-based policy advice. We also did part of this survey, what we have conducted to look at the stage right now on the science to policy interface. We have made a first course catalog with training materials on science to policies. And the idea really here is to have a hands-on task that actively creates and promotes and supports exchange mechanisms. The third one is the European Panel for Agricultural Transition. This is, we call it the EPAT. This is a yearly event where we bring politicians, researchers, and other stakeholders in a room, and we have a panel discussion. We have had the first one in Brussels in 24. We had 2025 in Malmö together with the Agroecological Conference. And this will be a yearly event where we bring policymakers and scientists and stakeholders in the room. The fourth task is collection and monitoring of the outputs of the partnership and make it available for the policymakers. This is a separate task, and we really want to make, like the previous speaker said, collect the information, but also condense it into information that is digestible for policymakers and facilitate that part of it. Other tasks are in planning now. We're going in the next phase, as you probably know, of this partnership. And these tasks will focus on understanding and advancing national mirror projects. There is also a task especially focusing the core organic export network to strengthen the policy coordination. And yeah, this is kind of the overview. With that, I would like again to invite you, as whether you're a researcher or you're engaged in living labs or partitioning, if you are interested to contact us or José, and keep an eye on obviously on the Agroecology Partnership Network. José, I want to thank you again for this presentation, and if there are some quick questions, I would be happy to answer that. But later also you can contact me in case of if you have interest to engage with our work package. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hubert. And no questions yet, but you've already earned a collaborator, because Aziz Omar is based at Harvard University, and he said he's just finished a PhD in agroecology. So I'm sure he will make contact with you, and probably we'll be collaborating, working together. So thank you very much. And I can tell, I must say that those of you interested in this, please contact the Agroecology Partnership website. Subscribe our newsletter, and you will receive news also of our events. We will be organizing further editions of different masterclass. And recently this year, in April, we've also organized here in Portugal a very interesting summer school, and we're going to have more editions in the future. So it's a face-to-face summer school. So get in touch and apply, and please keep contact. And the newsletter is a good way to keep in contact. So thank you, Hubert, for your presentation. And now let's go back to Ireland, and I invite our colleague David Wall from Chigas to come forward, take the stage. David Wall is going to talk about principal research. He's a principal research officer and a head of Center of TIGASC Environment, Soil and Land Use Research Program in Ireland. He's a leader of the EJP Soil Work Package 8 Science to Policy. He's a principal research officer and head of TIGASC Crops, Environment and Land Use Research Center at Johnstone Castle in Ireland. His research interests include building resilience in soils for sustainable food production systems, understanding the fate of nutrients and carbon applied to soils, identifying climate-smart and sustainable soil management practice, and identifying indicators of soil health. David is involved in providing scientific advice for policymakers and national and UE level across the soil and agro-environmental policy areas, and they will discuss successful interactions and methods with policymakers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for coming, and thank you for accepting our invitation. And the floor is yours, David. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And look, I hope to share some insights from my experience with EJP Soil on the science to policy. So I'll just share some slides and tell me when that's sharing. Okay. So look at I'll probably echo a lot of potentially what Denis Naughten has come up with, because our experience, I suppose, he's lived that experience as one of the policymakers, and from a group that has interacted with policy. We have that same experience, that the cup of coffee, it might have been a cup of coffee all the time. In our case, we had to deal with the COVID restrictions at the start of EJP Soil, which meant that we had to be socially distant, but definitely dialogue is key. And if there's one take-home message that I'll echo, will be that dialogue. We tend to get bogged down potentially with our scientific papers, which are our bread and butter as scientists, but those need to be distilled into policy messages that will fit the policy cycle. So what is EJP Soil? Just for a context, EJP Soil is a program around soil, a program of research, a very large program involving 26 different European countries, so most of Europe involved. And focus was climate smart and sustainable soil management of agricultural soil. So didn't cover all aspects of all types of land uses, but agricultural soils and knowledge framework and expected impacts were as follows. So we broke this down into knowledge development, knowledge sharing, knowledge harmonization and organization and storage. So we have a lot of soil data, and we have had a lot of soil data in research for a long time, but how do we package that? How do we put it together for maybe policy outcomes or for whatever the issues of the day? And then the knowledge application, applying that knowledge, getting it out there and making use, rather than, having it sitting on the shelf, so to speak. So the understanding of the soil management for climate change mitigation, adaptation, sustainable production and sustainable environment were the main expertise or the main remit of EJP Soil, and specifically soil carbon sequestration and its contribution to climate change mitigation. What we tried to do in the knowledge sharing and transfer, strengthen scientific capabilities and cooperation amongst scientists within the group, or within the consortium, and then support harmonized European soil information going outwards, or the utility of that could be, a number of different endpoints. Foster an uptake of that climate smart, sustainable soil management practices, and obviously developing region specific information, because as we know, across Europe or across any large geographic area, there will be contexts, there will be pedoclimatic differences, etc. So one size certainly doesn't fit all, and one soil certainly doesn't fit all in terms of the messaging. So long-term alignment of soil research was the goal here for agricultural production, obviously for that climate adaptation and mitigation, and for sustainable soil management. And I'll talk in a moment about the policy landscape that we were born into almost as a project, and how that changed and shaped the outputs of what we did. And farmers and farming sectors, we must be cognizant that they are the stewards of the land and of the soil resources, and forgetting those is going to be fatal in terms of actually achieving some impact at the end of the day. So that's really, really key. So the soil policy landscape, just to give a little bit of context. So EJP soil started off in 2020, and very quickly it became obvious that the EU soil strategy was on the table and retabled. There had been an effort for a soil directive many years, about a decade previous to that, but this was up. So we needed to pivot, and we needed to support that in terms of the policy landscape. Obviously, the CRCF, the regulation for carbon removals and carbon farming, came into vogue in 2022 and has since been realised. And obviously, the CAP, strategic planning, etc., was also on the table. So those would have been the three major policies that we were focused towards. So very quickly out of the blocks, we got focused around policies. We were at the starting point of a revision of some of those policies, like the CAP. Obviously, previous iterations had been there. And then as things evolved in year 4 and even into year 5, where those policy ambitions became either directives or were being voted on in their final stages within the Commission and the Parliament, we were primed in terms of responding to those policies, or quickly had to become nimble enough to be able to pivot to respond to those policies, even though maybe the project wasn't necessarily focused on those when it was being written. And that's a key point. We often write projects. Some of the outputs may be policy driven or responding to a policy issue. However, I think Dennis said it, timing. Timing is key, and timing for when you have those outputs ready. You might be too early, too late. Timing mightn't be good. However, when an opportunity arises and you're in that same space, then you need to be nimble and you need to pivot to be able to respond and get that timing right. And the other thing, as scientists, we do strive for perfection. We strive for, our scientific integrity is really, really key, and our outputs to making sure that they're fully considered, fully evidenced, etc. That's really important. But also in those early stages where a policy is under development, you mightn't have all the answers, but you might have some answers. So don't let perfection be the enemy of progress, would be another key point, that you still have something to trade on, you still have something to offer, even though you mightn't have the final answer that you are working towards. Just in terms of the two policies that I'll focus on a little bit, would be the soil monitoring law and the carbon removals and carbon farming framework, to be as two examples, I suppose, to focus the remainder of the talk around. So the approach, science to policy. Conventional approach has been, policy has been top down. The policy comes, the policymakers make the decision, and the policy is struck. However, key findings and needs analysis need to be considered, end users, practice adoption issues, etc. So policy may not be perfect all of the time, and if we don't consider the end users, the practice adoption pieces, etc., then as scientists, what we contribute and what we develop we may not see a space for it because of these other issues, that they mightn't be fit for road right now, or the adoption piece hasn't been considered and it might be too clunky, or the science mightn't be quite ripe or ready for the policy that's there at the moment. We need consultation and engagement with end users and feedback to identify what is reasonable and achievable. So as researchers, we might be have lofty ambitions, which we should do. However, in terms of the outputs, while the scientific paper might go all the way to that lofty ambition and might be horizon scanning almost, the policy may not be ready for that right now. So we may have to cookie cut or take pieces of that science, get them ready for where the policy cycle or the policy process is at today, and feed that in with the hope that policy, as it evolves, will be ready for that more horizon scanning science that's been done. And we need to foster communications with end users. So Denis and others have talked about not adding on the policy piece at the end of the project. They need to be considered early when the policy or when the project is being developed. Also, we need to foster communication with end users to see where they're at. They may not be ready for what's maybe available from science right now. However, if we have those communications early, you actually get them prepared for what might be to come, and that's really critical. So how does all this work? And how did it work in EJP soil? So we have project results, we have outputs from work packages or tasks or whatever you might have in your research project, and we have dialogue with policy stakeholders. And if you don't have the final piece, that dialogue with policy stakeholders, then it's very difficult to know where your niche is, where your input and your avenue in terms of getting impact, policy impact from your results and the outputs from your work packages, your deliverables, etc. And putting that jigsaw together, those pieces of the jigsaw together, is critical to understanding the policy context and the gaps and needs, but also having that feedback loop, that circular type loop where you start off with something that you get into the policy cycle, so you have something that's fit and ready and interesting to get in there. Once you start to have those dialogues, then the demand will come for more information. So the key part is starting off early and having something fit to respond to a policy issue or a policy need early on. Once you start to get into dialogue and building up the trust, then that is an evolving cycle as you move forward through your project. So policy stakeholder engagement, what did we do? So policy stakeholder mapping is the first point. Who are we talking about in terms of those policy stakeholders? We might think of the EC Commission, DG Agri, DG Environment, DG Klima as the gatekeepers on some of these policies. However, there's a lot more other actors in the policy cycle. So you have farmers' unions, you have COPA and COGECA at that EU level, you have the EEA, you have UNCCD, etc. So there's many people at that upper echelon, but also the influencers on that policy may be farmers' unions, it may be national governments, it may be other interested policy groups, NGOs, etc., in terms of the science that you're developing. So the first and foremost, what we did is we got to know who knows about the subject matter, who will show interest in this science. So that's the entry point. Who is directly impacted, because if you can communicate with those who are impacted straight up, they will take your science and they will take your messages on because they have something to win or they have something to lose in this whole policy cycle. Who is indirectly impacted. So they might be a harder sell to those because they might be further removed, but ultimately in terms of having influence and taking your science, they might be stronger in that policy cycle. And then also as you move down, who's potentially impacted and whose help is needed to actually get this across the line. So what we did was we took on surveys We introduced brainstorming activities and identification of stakeholders from within the consortium to start off with. Who did they think? And then when we got those people into a room, so to speak, or in terms of survey or in terms of dialogue, they identified a lot more. There was that snowball effect in terms of who were they also linked with that maybe the scientists weren't aware of. So across the EJP soil domains, obviously I mentioned everything from soil management practices right up to mitigation and adaptation in terms of climate change and everything in between. So we had many different endpoints for the outputs. And you know, if I'm working in the Department of Environment or the Department of Climate Change in a national government, I might be quite different than that person who's responsible for the CAP. You know, and it's important to map those out. Who are your outputs? Who are the people that you need to be talking to about that specific project or that specific task, if the project is large, like EJP soil was. And the policy stakeholders identified at EU level, at national level, and not forgetting regional scales. So some of our larger countries in Central Europe, things might be quite different. If we take France for an example, you have regions in France, you have everything from the Mediterranean to northern France, which probably has a pedoclimatic context more similar to Ireland. And, you know, the outputs and that are going to be quite different in terms of the needs of policymakers across those regions. And again, this is a snapshot just showing you some information about who was in our policy stakeholder groups. So we had policy administrators, policymakers at about 58% of the group. You know, researchers were about 10%, and they had influence in the policy cycle. And then you have all these other actors, you know, policy administrators in agriculture, farmers and farmers association, both conventional and others. We had agrarian advisory technical people, and we had public administration. So quite a varied group when you map those out in terms of who is in your policy stakeholder group, and then also how to craft messages that are going to land with each of those. So, you know, an advisor might want a very different message, or a farmer might want a very different message than a public administrator who might know a whole lot about agriculture, to the policymakers who are working directly with agriculture. And again, what did they want in terms of communication? We mapped this out before we start to develop, you know, our outputs, etc., for this science to policy endeavor. We knew we were going to have scientific papers, but then what did the policymakers or policy stakeholders want? And again, interviews, workshops, and panels. They wanted dialogue. They wanted to talk to trusted stakeholders, trusted, I suppose, scientists or communicators on scientists that they could ask, probe, get questions answered in layman's language in terms of the policy ambitions or policy pieces that they were after. Technical reports were second in that grouping in terms of to have the evidence behind those people, those communicators, scientific communicators, followed by policy brief, peer-reviewed scientific publications, and one-to-one discussions with individual scientists after that. So those are the formats which were really critical, and I think that's been echoed by the other speakers. So next up was building a stakeholder network. If you don't have a network, if the stakeholders don't know you, how can they come and ask you for your outputs? So this is another key area there that, you know, as scientists, we're stuck in our scientific bubble. We have maybe a fabulous network with other scientists. We might have a network at national level with some others who might be policy stakeholders or may not. However, you know, to map those out, build that network beyond your scientific network is really important. And what EJP Soil did on this respect was to build national hubs. So who are these national hubs? Basically, everybody from 5 to 15 people at a national level who were a stakeholder, a soil stakeholder at this point, not just policy stakeholders. You had farmers in there, you had private industry in there, you had the food buyers in there, etc. And if you look at the pie chart here in the figure, scientific community was about a third of those national hubs. After that, then others, it might be consumers, others who have a stake in agricultural soils, policy, general public, 19%. You have policymaker stakeholders, about 14%, industry, about 6%, and others. So again, a wider grouping who are going to take on the outputs from the science. Also, these have served well because in many countries, these national hubs have served as a foundation for the mirror groups under the EU soil mission going forward, which has been a huge success. In terms of the national workshops that the national hubs would have conducted, or EJP Soil conducted with the national hubs, in terms of attendance, obviously the research community was big in there, as other researchers in our countries, it could have been the universities, etc. In those, but you'll notice a close second were policymakers. They were ministries, government agencies, and policymakers in their own right. Were the second. So once we became known to these stakeholders, the scientists wanted to know what was going on in terms of the universities or other scientists in the different countries. But a close second was the policymakers. And I suppose once you build that relationship, you need to feed it. And that's a key question. How do you feed the policymakers once you become known to them? Okay, creating research solutions to meet the stakeholder needs obviously is the next piece of the puzzle here. And again, by way of survey, by way of communication, we looked at over 500 public and private advisors across 22 countries to identify knowledge gaps and needs at the lower level. And remember, I said from the outset, usually policy goes from the top down, and we feed those at the top as scientists because they're easier to get at. It takes less steps to get communication going with those. However, it's a lot more tasking to find out what the needs are from the bottom up side. However, we did this and it paid dividends in terms of getting traction. And I think other speakers have talked about, it's not just selling it to the policymakers. You have to get the others on board as well. Those influencers, those people with a stake, those people who lobby policymakers, if they're singing from the same hymn sheet because they're exposed to the same science, then there's a higher possibility of achieving impact in the longer run. So it could be your farmers' unions, it could be your public or private advisory programs, it could be industry that you're looking at. And funnily enough, in terms of the different domain areas, scientific domain areas on soils that we were involved in, there was good match up in a lot of cases in terms of what were higher priorities for multi-stakeholder surveys versus agricultural stakeholder surveys, i.e. The advisors across the 22 different countries. So the scene is set now in terms of the early legwork. We've mapped our stakeholders. We find out what format they wanted those dialogues or those interactions, engagements with. And we've also looked from the bottom up to see was there converging areas that needed to be fed with science, or were they diverging opinions in terms of what the issues were and how we could solve those for both policy and for the primary stakeholders being farmers and advisors. So what did we do? Fostering policy stakeholder dialogue. It was sought from the early interactions with the policy stakeholders, and we set up policy forums. So where you invite the policymakers around a theme or a subject, you contact the right ones at EU level. So it could be, you know, for the soil monitoring law, it could have been DG Env. For CAP, it could be DG Agri, or for the CRCF, it could have been DG Environment. At a national level, who were the responsible ministries then that were front-facing towards each of those? And then was there other stakeholders that were also engaged at that early part of the policy cycle? Could it have been lobbyists? Could have been farmers' unions? Was it the European Environment Agency, etc.? You bring them to a room. At the time, as I said, we were blighted a little bit by COVID restrictions, but we got to grips with Zoom at the time. It's probably now moved to Teams and a mixture of other platforms, but we brought them together and tried to make it interesting. So rather than just talking to them, we made it interactive and tried to get them to engage, rather than having one or two dominant voices in the room doing all the talking and others just listening and doing that. So adapt to virtual spaces, promote active engagement, appropriate prompts to encourage feedback, stimulate discussion on relevant topics. And, you know, a key point here is we always feel that we have to present, so that there's not a deafening silence in the room. As scientists, it might be good to present something and then invite reaction, something maybe more controversial, something cutting edge that you've identified, etc., and ask, where does this fit, or how does this fulfill your needs? And very quickly, if there's engagement around something that interests them and you have the right audience for the domain expertise, you will get that feedback. And that can be a shorter interaction rather than spending 2 hours and you're trying to force the issue. And again, we found out where, in terms of the different EJP soil domains, what was to the high priority in terms of something like a Menti type interaction, a Mentimeter. Just in terms of what we did over the first 4 years, this was a 5-year program, but we started off slow, as you see. We went to EU policymakers to the top first, and we had 27 members of the EU Commission and others at high level at our first event. We then went to various national, just giving examples of 3, where, you know, in Ireland, a small geography, we had 10 key people at our first policy workshop to find out again what were their needs, and we married those up with the needs of the EU policymakers to see was there convergence or divergence in terms of those. By the time we got to year 3 and year 4, you can see there we had big audiences, we had built trust, we had become a trusted broker of scientific output, and we were on the map as much as we had mapped who our audience was, which was really, really key in terms of getting success and getting the right people to come. As I say, policymakers are busy people. They have short time intervals where they're going to engage with you, but if they find that you have the right pitch, the right information, and you have engaged and built trust, they'll come for those short interactions periodically. Pitfalls. There are many, but key ones that we found out through this journey were, you know, outspoken stakeholders may dominate virtual settings. You know, I think we've all learned that. We've all become a lot more wiser in the last 5 years in terms of how virtual settings use, and the use of tools to allow feedback without speaking is really, really important. But these have to be intuitive, they have to be easy, and they have to be informative that somebody is going to engage with them, because fatigue can set in very easily. You know, stakeholder engagement, it requires appropriate coordination, need to strategize and reduce the number of different times stakeholders are contacted, because fatigue does set in. If you go too many times to the same stakeholder, they will disengage very, very quickly. So it has to be important. It has to be worth their effort and time, and it also has to be engagement that they are getting something out of, or that they can ask and you will respond within a definite time frame. And, you know, illustrate and inform stakeholders how feedback informs decisions. It's cyclical, not linear in terms of the process. And, you know, it requires a plan early in time. It's not something to be added on to the end of a project. Science to policy interactions. How can project leverage existing information to build new connections with stakeholders? So a project, depending on its size or whatever, may not be able to do it all itself, and shouldn't maybe do it all itself, but there's probably existing networks like this agroecology partnership that you can buddy up with and be interesting for them and be interesting for your project. So synergies is what we're talking about here. And, you know, identifying related projects and initiatives needs to be done early. Cataloging a database and building those synergies in terms of what, why, and when. Identifying potential synergies at a high enough level that the networks are already established, that you don't have to build a new one per se. And then facilitating those connections, building trust with that partnership or network is as important as building trust with this stakeholder, that there's a synergy or a quid pro quo in terms of them collaborating with you and you collaborating with them. Synergies and initiatives that EJP Soil was involved with, there was many. Obviously, we had many partners, and you know, this took a bit of effort to build those synergies, again, build trust, and to have that quid pro quo that both were gaining out of getting involved. Synergies at the EU level, we had synergies with these. JRC is another group there that's very important. You know, they have that science piece that they will take on information, and if you can build relationships there, that can be very fruitful in the whole soil space, and also entry into the EU Soil Observatory if you have those kind of outputs. Final piece, a few examples. Successful policy stakeholder engagement that we were involved in. So, responding to the policy needs of the soil monitoring law, we started off with a policy forum in year 2, defining thresholds and reference values for various indicators. That's where the proposal was at that point in time. The pros and cons of various approaches and classification and prioritization of indicators. You know, then we had an open webinar where we invited Marco Barbero from DG Environment to actually speak and talk about where they were at. So it was an opportunity for them to break down some barriers to get the early stages of that policy out there. Not to be put on the spot, I suppose, and we managed that in terms of the questions, etc., but to provide an opportunity for discussion where they could learn what science had and what other stakeholders were thinking of the early iteration of the law, and also for them to get some messages out there earlier on. And then, you know, in the final stages of that, there was specific requests from DG Environment in terms of biological indicators, what biological indicators would be best. The transfer functions in terms of if other countries had different methods or whatever, how could they be harmonized, etc. And also how to in terms of monitoring and assessment. And again, I'm not going to labor this slide too much, but you know, the impact assessment, there was 14 paragraphs that contained EJP soil results. Many more communications, as you can see in terms of the slide, and that webinar or that interaction and having Marco Barbero from DG Environment involved has had over 1,800 views since in terms, and we had 511 policy stakeholders at that event. So again, takes time, but well worth the effort in the long run. Again, you know, proposal versus indicators in the soil monitoring law, EJP soil would have fed into the final suggested biological indicators that were tabled in this, and again put into a policy brief. Setting thresholds and thresholds for indicators, again a number of different ways and methods that, since the law was voted in last week, or that will become more apparent in the early 2026, when member states begin to think about this a little bit more, now that it's a reality. And, you know, are there fixed target thresholds? Is it natural reference values? Is it a distribution of the measurements, or is it relative change? And, you know, a lot of thought and a lot of dialogue went in on what the options were in terms of both the indicators, but also the thresholds or trigger values. CRCF, you know, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, just in the interest of time, but again, this became the subject matter for the third policy forum, looking at carbon sequestration, but also looking at trade-offs. So if we will carbon through different methods or whatever, what are the trade-offs there in terms of other greenhouse gases? You know, do we increase nitrous oxide by putting on manures, as well as building carbon? You know, if we have more cover crops, what are the effects on other ecosystem services or other soil functions? So again, that's very relevant, that policy is not blinkered, that it's looking through a wider lens in terms of more holistically, what effects is it going to have on farms, different pedoclimatic contexts, etc. And again, you know, the quality criteria, the certification process, which Marvick project has now taken on, and also, you know, the double counting and all those issues that with the other schemes, CAP, etc., that are already out there. So we would have interacted and looked at those aspects in terms of the work. Provided feedback to DG Klima on CRCF delegated acts under development, feedback in the call for feedback on technical survey, on MRV methodologies, and then many dialogues, the cups of coffee, as Denis Naughten has talked about, with the policymakers once we became known and trusted brokers of the science. Again, just an example there from Carbosec, the area of implementation in terms of, you can see there, reduced tillage is probably the biggest in terms of hectares. The use of biochar can be put on many hectares, and so on and so forth in some of these. When you look at the emission factors for each of these and multiply them up, then things re-rank in terms of what effect, what impact we might have across the whole of Europe. That might be very different for your country or your region, in terms of which measure might be the most sought after. But when we think about the European policy and that umbrella and how that's going to meet the target, first and foremost, before autonomy is given to the member states in terms of what they'll do, we needed to do this level of analysis as well, which provides a bit of a pathway or a vision for policymakers to actually see how these policies might make inroads in that. And again, 20% of the emissions reductions could be achieved through these pathway in terms of this piece of work. Okay, CAP as the final one. You know, we had again a lot of discussions with DG Agri. The CAP, how that met in here in terms of measures and practice adoption and sustainable, climate smart and sustainable soil management practices that would come into the CAP, and maybe associated schemes there in terms of the soil monitoring law. And if we discovered that soils in Europe were unhealthy or needed, you know, to be transitioned to better management, what offering and how was that going to join up with CAP schemes going forward? So a lot of discussions there in terms of the science that was coming out. Obviously, no regret and no trade-off management practices, and looking at individual management practices in a wider lens in terms of multiple ecosystem services was really important. Obviously, at a national level, this fed into various national policies And again, through the national hubs, the information was recognised at national level and sought by national policymakers. Again, once those connections were made. And again, look at, as scientists, we also like to find out, you know, where we're being cited, etc. And just looking at policy citations as opposed to total citations, again, we could see there early on in 2022, 2023, and even 2024 there, we were beginning to get citations in terms of key policy outputs. Those were the first papers then that we got into policy briefs and got working on as a science to policy work package to be able to translate those messages. We could see that they were in demand, that science, and obviously for a national level, we needed to distill those down. There can be language barriers. We might need to have it in local language. We might need to change terminology, etc., so that these can be taken up by policymakers, policy stakeholders, and into the policy cycle. And overall, you know, the metrics are good in terms of policy impacts. Policy briefs, just finally, in terms of another output, you know, as scientists, we may not be, you know, totally fixated on the policy brief, and it's another task, I suppose, after the paper is written, that may come late in the project, and, you know, can be seen as a little bit of a thorn in the side in terms of, oh, we have to write a policy brief. You know, I would challenge the science to policy tasks or the communication and dissemination work packages to engage with the various groupings within consortia or those people that are writing the papers to break down the barriers of creating a policy brief. Also, you know, if you have somebody that's used to policy messages, that can be very useful to discuss with the key scientists in terms of what this means in a policy context and how to break down that maybe over elaborate scientific jargon into plain messages that policymakers will take on, and also looking around the corners in terms of what implications this might have in terms of policy, but also other stakeholders. So, lessons learned, final piece. Timing and the capacity to adapt to the work program to the policy needs is really, really critical, right? So you need to be looking at those policy cycles that you're facing off against or facing up to, and look at the timing of when the policymakers may need the outputs. It may be that your project may not finish and you may not have all the results in time for that key process in the policy cycle, but you still probably have something to say. And if you're in early, you'll also then, your final piece and your more concrete evidence will be taken on at a later date in terms of that policy review. Being anchored at national level is critical, because the way these policy works is the umbrella policy starts at the EU level, but a lot of autonomy is given to national member states to actually to implement the policy, and that can, you know, change somewhat, or there can be different aspects to that at the national level. Also, the national level and the ministries are speaking to the EU counterparts in terms of that policy development. So that might be your route to market in terms of getting your science into the policy cycle in the first place before you've built that trust at the higher level. Using EC Commission consultation channels, so there's many channels there in terms of getting your science to be heard. Partnerships like this, one that you know, the Agroecology partnership, etc., they carry weight. They are already have the contacts. They're known, etc., and there's many other partnerships out there depending on your domain area. These should be utilized, also leveraging other projects, etc. Direct interactions, Dennis and others have said it, there's no substitute for these. Once you build the relationship, then that cup of coffee or that dialogue is critical. Being able to send an email that will be responded to when one is sought, or receiving an email with a request for information, that's the ultimate. Then you know that you have a direct line in terms of getting your science to be heard. And then progressive and collaborative elaboration of policy relevant synthesis and messages. As I've said, there's no project has the timing perfect, but don't be afraid to start off with a bite-sized output from your project, a piece of science that might be sought after, and then as the rest of the evidence becomes available, feed that on at a later date. And again, you know, demand-driven for policy stakeholder needs, so find out what the needs, identify who's there, who needs it, bring together the relevant expertise. So it mightn't be just you or your project. You may need, or you may be aware of another project, and together you may have the full message for the policy cycle, and that's not such a bad thing. It's not diluting your message, but it's actually getting impact at the end of the day. And then provide guidance where needed to refine policy messages. So, you know, as scientists, we're not maybe always good at the policy communication, but there may be somebody in the consortium, that work package on communication and dissemination that we all have in our projects. Somebody there will have that knowledge, and don't be afraid to consult. And look at, we identified the Agroecology partnership as something that can forward, now that the EJP soil is finished, as a key partnership, as a key, I suppose, communication network that can be utilized going forward, and you know, that relationship was built. So with that, I'll stop talking, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Hey, thank you very much, David. It was wonderful talk. And I've got a couple of questions here. One of the questions is, in your experience, is it possible to persuade a policymaker to be an active part of a project, like a partner? Are they allowed to engage directly in research projects, or can they only be involved in focus meetings and webinars and all that?
Typically, the policymakers won't be actively involved directly as part of the consortium per se. It may happen at some national level or regional level that they may be more amenable to that, depending on the subject matter or depending on the level of policymaker. But obviously, at the higher level, the ministries or whatever, they need to keep their independence. And at that point, as part of a steering group for a project, or as part of a consultative body, you know, a consultative group to the project, you can get your stakeholder engagement and get that very valuable input early on. So, you know, they may say no if you're asking them to be part of the project when you're writing a project or whatever else, because of the independence piece and because they want to be nimble in terms of what policy and what outputs comes of that. But there's other ways and means to engage the policymakers early.
The next question is, how could you know that the specific part of a project is ready to be written as a policy brief? Do you necessarily need to wait until the final results are finally published, or when would it be recommended?
Yeah, so look at, I think most of us as scientists prefer to have the peer-reviewed publication done and dusted, that it's fact and everything is well and good and we can trust it. However, there are components to projects there that are probably ready for a policy brief early on. And I give the example of the methodologies. So you might have a methodology for sampling, etc. It may not need the peer review. It may be tested, etc. and maybe needed in the policy cycle. Another one was looking at how to set threshold and trigger values. Again, you know, that's more methodological, it's more technical from that point of view, rather than the hard evidence that you might need for the peer review publication. So depending on the needs of policymakers, it may not always be the nth degree of the science that's fully peer reviewed, etc. They may have other questions that are more technical, more administrative almost, or they may need to offer up options to the member states in terms of trying to implement something. So early on to say, in their dialogues, to say, well, these might be the options going forward until we have developed the policy and that this is what we're considering. If they're not aware of those things through policy briefs or dialogues, then they can't talk about those. So, there's for and against. There's a little bit of both.
Thank you. Okay, to wrap it up, I think we've had a very interesting and profitable masterclass. And stay tuned, because I think we're going to organize quite a few more in the future. And thank you for your comments. And before we leave, I'm going to give the floor to Sara for some last advices and informations. And for my side, I finish here, and I wish you all Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and hope to see you in the near future. Back to Sara now.
So thank you all again. Allow me to provide you some quick final remarks. We will take a few days to make the videos available and send you the links. Sorry for that, but we will try to be fast. We will also send certificates to those who require them. I will ask José to write again his email so that you can request the certificates if you need them. We will also send you a short questionnaire to evaluate your degree of satisfaction with this masterclass. I will really hope that you have enjoyed it. And thank you all for attending. Major thanks to all our wonderful speakers from today and yesterday, of course. And stay tuned for further events of the Agroecology Partnership. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay.